Sarah Martinez had always been different from other kids in her small Texas town. While her classmates played with dolls and video games, she spent her afternoons in the dusty backyard, talking to animals that most people would run away from. Her grandmother called it a gift, but her parents worried it was just a phase that would pass with time. The Martinez family lived on the edge of Millbrook, a town so small that everyone knew everyone else's business. Their property stretched back into wild scrubland where cactus grew tall and wildlife roamed freely. It was there, on a scorching summer day when Sarah was 12, that she first met the creature that would change her life forever. The warthog appeared at their back fence like something out of a nature documentary. Most people would have called animal control immediately, but Sarah saw something different in the animal's dark eyes. While her mother screamed from the kitchen window and her father reached for his hunting rifle, Sarah walked slowly toward the fence with her hands empty and her voice soft. The warthog was massive, easily weighing over 200 pounds with curved tusks that could tear through flesh in seconds. Its coarse hair was matted with mud, and scars across its back told stories of fights with other animals. But when Sarah spoke to it, the aggressive stance melted away. The animal's ears twitched forward and it made a low rumbling sound that seemed almost like purring. Sarah named him Brutus, though she never told her parents about the name. Every day after school, she would sit by the fence and talk to him. She brought apples and vegetables from their kitchen, always careful not to let her mother see. Brutus would wait for her, sometimes standing at the fence for hours until she came home from school. Her father, Miguel Martinez, was a practical man who worked construction and believed in simple solutions to problems. When he first saw the warthog, his instinct was to scare it away or call someone to remove it, but Sarah begged him to let it stay, promising it wasn't hurting anyone. Against his better judgment, Miguel agreed to wait and see what happened. The neighbors were not as understanding. Mrs. Henderson, from next door, complained to the city council about the dangerous animal living so close to their homes. Mr. Peterson, who owned the hardware store, started spreading stories about how warthogs could attack children and destroy property. Soon, half the town was talking about the Martinez family and their strange pet. Sarah's mother, Elena, was caught between supporting her daughter and worrying about what people would think. She had grown up in the same town and knew how quickly gossip could spread. She also worried about Sarah's safety, even though the girl seemed to have some kind of magical connection with the animal. As weeks passed, something extraordinary began to happen. Brutus started showing behaviors that amazed everyone who witnessed them. When Sarah was sad about a bad day at school, the warthog would push small flowers through the fence gaps. When she was sick with a fever, Brutus would lie against the fence, as if trying to comfort her from the other side. The local veterinarian, Dr. James Wilson, heard about the unusual situation and came to observe. He had worked with animals for over 30 years, but he had never seen a wild warthog behave the way Brutus did around Sarah. The animal showed none of the aggressive territorial behavior typical of its species. Instead, it seemed calm, almost protective. Dr. Wilson learned that Brutus had likely escaped from a wildlife preserve about 50 miles away. The preserve had reported a missing warthog several months earlier, but they had assumed it had been killed by predators or hunters. The fact that it had survived in the wild and formed a bond with a human child was remarkable. Sarah's connection with Brutus became stronger each day. She would do her homework sitting by the fence, and the warthog would lie in the shade nearby. When thunderstorms came, Brutus would move closer to their house as if seeking comfort from Sarah's presence. On weekends, Sarah would spend hours talking to him about her dreams, her fears, and her hopes for the future. The girl had few friends at school. Her classmates thought she was weird for preferring animals to people. She was quiet and thoughtful, often spending lunch breaks alone reading books about wildlife and animal behavior. But with Brutus, she felt understood and accepted in a way she had never experienced with humans. Her grades began to improve as she threw herself into learning everything she could about warthogs and animal behavior. She checked out every book the library had about wildlife, and she started dreaming about becoming a veterinarian or animal behaviorist someday. Brutus had given her a sense of purpose she had never felt before, but not everyone in Millbrook was happy about the situation. The town council received multiple complaints about the warthog, and pressure was building to do something about it. Some people worried about liability if the animal hurt someone. Others simply didn't like having something so unusual in their quiet, predictable town. Sarah's father tried to protect his daughter's relationship with Brutus, but he could feel the pressure mounting from all sides. His co-workers at the construction site made jokes about his family's pet pig, and his wife faced whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. The family was becoming isolated because of their association with the wild animal. Despite the growing tension, Sarah's bond with Brutus continued to deepen. She began to understand his different sounds and gestures, almost as if they were developing their own language. When he was hungry, he would make specific grunting sounds. When he was happy to see her, his tail would move in a particular way. When he sensed danger, his ears would flatten against his head. The relationship was changing Sarah too. She became more confident and self-assured, no longer caring as much about what her classmates thought of her. She had found something special and real, and she was determined to protect it no matter what anyone else said. But forces were already in motion that would soon threaten everything Sarah had come to love about her life with Brutus. The town's patience was wearing thin, and soon they would have to make a choice that would change everything for both the girl and her unusual friend. 3 months after Brutus first appeared, the complaints reached a breaking point. Mayor Robert Collins called an emergency town meeting to address what he called the Warthog situation. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the Mime Community Center, and word spread quickly through Millbrook that a decision would be made about the animal's fate. Sarah overheard her parents talking in hushed voices about the meeting. Her mother was folding laundry with sharp, angry movements, while her father sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. They didn't know she was listening from the hallway, but their words hit her like physical blows. "They want him gone, Miguel," Elena whispered. "Mrs. Henderson has been calling the mayor every day. She says property values are going down because people are afraid to move here." "It's not right," Miguel replied, his voice heavy with frustration. "That animal hasn't hurt anyone. Sarah loves him more than anything in this world. But what choice do we have? If the town council votes to remove him, we can't stop them. And if we fight it, we'll become outcasts here. This is our home, Miguel. Our families have lived here for generations." Sarah felt her world crumbling. She ran outside to the fence where Brutus was waiting for her, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand that something was wrong. She wrapped her fingers through the chain-link fence and pressed her face against the cool metal. "They want to take you away," she whispered to Brutus, "but I won't let them. I promise." The warthog moved closer to the fence and made a soft, rumbling sound. Sarah had learned that this meant he was trying to comfort her. She reached through the gaps in the fence to touch his coarse fur, drawing strength from the contact. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She made a decision that would prove to be both brave and dangerous. She snuck out of the house at 3 a.m. and went to sit with Brutus. Under the starlit sky, she made a plan to save her friend. The next morning, Sarah went to school as usual, but her mind was elsewhere. During lunch, she approached her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had always been kind to her. Sarah explained the situation and asked if Mrs. Rodriguez could help her research legal ways to protect Brutus. Mrs. Rodriguez was surprised by Sarah's request, but she was also impressed by the girl's determination and maturity. Together, they spent the afternoon looking up animal protection laws and wildlife regulations. What they discovered gave Sarah hope. According to state law, if a wild animal had established a peaceful coexistence with humans for more than 90 days without causing harm, there were legal protections that could apply. Additionally, if the animal showed signs of domestication or dependency on human care, it might be possible to obtain a special permit to keep it. Sarah also learned about wildlife sanctuaries and rescue organizations that might be able to help. She wrote down phone numbers and addresses, planning to contact every organization she could find. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. Meanwhile, the pressure on the Martinez family was increasing. Miguel came home from work with stories of coworkers and neighbors asking when they were going to get rid of that pig. Elena faced cold shoulders at the grocery store and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. The family's isolation was becoming more apparent each day. Sarah's parents had always been active in the community, but now they felt like outsiders in their own town. The stress was taking a toll on their marriage, and Sarah could see the worry lines deepening around her mother's eyes. But Sarah had allies she didn't know about. Dr. Wilson, the veterinarian who had observed Brutus, had been doing his own research. He was fascinated by the bond between Sarah and the warthog, and he believed it represented something scientifically significant. He began documenting Brutus's behavior, taking photos and videos that showed the animal's unusual calmness and apparent emotional intelligence. Dr. Wilson also reached out to colleagues at universities and wildlife research centers. He shared his observations about Brutus and Sarah's relationship, hoping to find support from the scientific community. Several researchers expressed interest in studying the pair, which could provide legal grounds for protecting the animal. The night before the town meeting, Sarah made another secret visit to Brutus. This time, she brought a notebook and wrote down everything she wanted to say to defend him. She practiced her speech out loud with Brutus as her only audience. "You're not just an animal," she told him. "You're my friend. You've never hurt anyone. You've made me braver and stronger, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows that tomorrow night." Brutus seemed to understand the importance of the moment. He stayed close to the fence, occasionally making soft sounds that Sarah interpreted as encouragement. As the hours passed, Sarah felt her determination growing stronger. The morning of the town meeting, Dr. Wilson called the Martinez house. He spoke with Miguel and Elena, explaining his research and offering to speak at the meeting on Brutus's behalf. He had prepared a presentation about human-animal bonds and the scientific value of studying Brutus and Sarah's relationship. Sarah's parents were surprised and grateful for Dr. Wilson's support. They had felt alone in their fight to protect their daughter's unusual friendship, and knowing that a respected professional was willing to stand with them gave them hope. That afternoon, Sarah came home from school to find her parents sitting at the kitchen table with serious expressions. They had been discussing the situation all day, and they had reached a decision. "We're going to fight for Brutus," Miguel told his daughter. "Dr. Wilson is going to speak at the meeting tonight, and we want you to speak too. You know Brutus better than anyone, and people need to hear your side of the story." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She had never spoken in front of a large group of adults before, but she knew this might be her only chance to save Brutus. She spent the rest of the afternoon preparing, with her parents helping her organize her thoughts and practice her presentation. As evening approached, the Martinez family prepared to attend the meeting that would determine Brutus's fate. Sarah clutched her notebook and tried to calm her racing heart. She knew that in a few hours she would have to stand up in front of most of the adults in her town and convince them that her friendship with a warthog was worth protecting. The future of everything she cared about would be decided in one night. The community center was packed beyond capacity when the Martinez family arrived. Sarah had never seen so many people in one place in Millbrook. Folding chairs filled every available space, and people stood along the walls. The air was thick with tension and the buzz of hushed conversations that stopped when Sarah walked in with her parents. Mayor Collins sat behind a long table at the front of the room, flanked by the 5 members of the town council. Sarah recognized all of them from around town, but tonight they looked different, more official and intimidating. Their faces were serious as they shuffled through papers and spoke in low voices to each other. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front row, surrounded by other neighbors who had complained about Brutus. She wore her best dress and had her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. When she saw Sarah, her expression hardened and she whispered something to the woman next to her. Sarah's stomach churned with nervousness. She clutched her notebook so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and her mother squeezed her other hand. They found seats in the middle of the room, and Sarah tried to make herself invisible. Dr. Wilson arrived just as the meeting was about to start. He carried a briefcase and a laptop, looking professional and confident. He nodded to the Martinez family as he found a seat near the front. Sarah felt a small surge of hope seeing him there. Mayor Collins called the meeting to order by tapping a wooden gavel on the table. The room fell silent immediately, and all eyes turned to the front. "We're here tonight to address the issue of the wild warthog that has taken up residence on the Martinez property," the mayor began. "This situation has caused concern among many residents, and we need to make a decision about how to proceed." He explained that the town council had 3 options: order the immediate removal of the animal, allow it to stay with strict conditions, or refer the matter to state wildlife authorities. Each option would be discussed before a vote was taken. Mrs. Henderson was the first to speak when the mayor opened the floor for public comment. She stood up slowly, using her cane for support, and faced the room with the confidence of someone who had lived in Millbrook for over 70 years. "I've lived next to the Martinez family for 15 years, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "They're good people, and I have nothing against them personally. But this animal is dangerous. Warthogs are wild beasts that belong in Africa, not in a residential neighborhood." She went on to describe her fears about property values and public safety. She mentioned stories she had read online about warthog attacks and the diseases that wild animals could carry. Several people in the audience nodded in agreement, and Sarah felt her hopes sinking. 3 more neighbors spoke against allowing Brutus to stay. They talked about liability issues, the precedent it might set for other wild animals, and their concerns about children's safety. Each speaker seemed more convincing than the last, and Sarah could see some of the council members taking notes. Then Mr. Peterson from the hardware store stood up, but instead of speaking against Brutus, he surprised everyone. "I've been watching this situation for months," he said, his gruff voice thoughtful. "I was against it at first, I'll admit that. But I've seen that girl with that animal, and I've never seen anything like it. That warthog follows her around like a puppy. It's never shown any aggression, not even when my dog got loose and ran into their yard barking." He paused and looked directly at Sarah. "Sometimes something special happens that we don't understand, and maybe we shouldn't be so quick to destroy it just because it's different." A murmur went through the crowd, and Sarah felt a flicker of hope. She hadn't expected anyone besides Dr. Wilson to speak in favor of Brutus. Dr. Wilson was the next to address the council. He stood up confidently and activated his laptop, which was connected to a projector screen. The first image that appeared was a photograph of Sarah and Brutus sitting peacefully by the fence. "I'm Dr. James Wilson, and I've been observing this animal for 3 months, he began. "What you're seeing here is unprecedented. This warthog has displayed behaviors that contradict everything we know about wild animal behavior." He showed videos of Brutus responding to Sarah's voice, bringing her flowers, and demonstrating protective behaviors. He explained the scientific significance of their bond and the potential for research that could benefit animal behavior studies worldwide. "This animal poses no threat to the community," Dr. Wilson concluded. "In fact, it represents an opportunity for Millbrook to be part of something scientifically important. Universities are already expressing interest in studying this relationship." The room was quiet as Dr. Wilson returned to his seat. Sarah could see that some people were impressed by his presentation, but others still looked skeptical. Mayor Collins looked down at Sarah and her parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, would you like to speak for your family?" Miguel stood up first. His hands shook slightly, but his voice was steady. "My daughter has a gift with animals. I've seen her calm aggressive dogs and injured birds. When Brutus first appeared, I wanted him gone. But Sarah saw something in him that the rest of us missed. He's never been aggressive, never caused any damage. He's made my daughter happier than I've ever seen her." Elena spoke next, her voice emotional but strong. "Sarah has always been different, and I used to worry about that. But Brutus has given her confidence and purpose. She's talking about becoming a veterinarian now. She's found her calling because of this animal. If we take that away from her, we're taking away part of who she is." Then it was Sarah's turn. Her legs felt weak as she stood up, and the room suddenly seemed enormous. Every face was turned toward her, some friendly, some hostile, most just curious. She opened her notebook and tried to remember the speech she had practiced. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Then she took a deep breath and spoke louder. "Brutus isn't just an animal to me. He's my friend. He's never hurt anyone, and he never would. He protects me and comforts me when I'm sad." She talked about how Brutus had changed her life, how he had given her direction and purpose. She described their daily interactions and the way he seemed to understand her emotions. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke from her heart instead of her notes. "Please don't take him away," she concluded, tears streaming down her face. "He needs me and I need him. We're not hurting anyone. We're just different, and that should be okay." The room was completely silent when Sarah sat down. Even Mrs. Henderson looked moved by the girl's passionate plea. Sarah's parents each put an arm around her, and she could see that many people in the audience were wiping their eyes. Mayor Collins announced that the council would deliberate for 15 minutes before taking a vote. As the council members huddled together in quiet discussion, the audience broke into small groups. debating the issue among themselves. Sarah couldn't hear what the council was saying, but she watched their faces intently, trying to read their expressions. Some looked sympathetic, others concerned. The 15 minutes felt like hours. Finally, Mayor Collins called for order and announced that the council was ready to vote. Sarah held her breath as he called each council member's name and asked for their decision. The fate of her friendship with Brutus would be decided by 5 votes. The council vote was closer than anyone expected. 3 members voted to allow Brutus to stay under strict conditions, while 2 voted for his immediate removal. Sarah felt her heart pounding as Mayor Collins announced the decision, but her relief was short-lived when she heard the conditions. Brutus would be allowed to remain, but the Martinez family would have to obtain proper permits, build reinforced fencing, carry special insurance, and allow monthly inspections by animal control officers. They would also have to pay for any damages if Brutus ever caused problems, and the decision would be reviewed again in 6 months. The conditions were expensive and complicated, but Sarah's family agreed immediately. They had won the battle, but Sarah could see the worry in her parents' eyes. The permits alone would cost more than their family could easily afford, and the insurance requirements were even more challenging. As people filed out of the community center, the reactions were mixed. Some neighbors congratulated the Martinez family, while others shook their heads disapprovingly. Mrs. Henderson approached Sarah with a stern expression. "I hope you understand the responsibility you've taken on, young lady," she said. "If that animal ever causes any trouble, the whole town will know who to blame." But then she surprised Sarah by adding, "However, I have to admit, your speech tonight was very moving. I can see how much that creature means to you." Dr. Wilson stayed after most people had left to discuss the next steps with Sarah's family. He offered to help with the permit applications and to provide documentation of his research to support their case with the state wildlife authorities. "This is just the beginning," he told Sarah. "Now we have to prove that Brutus can coexist peacefully with the community, long term." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls and preparations. Miguel worked overtime to earn money for the permits and fencing materials. Elena researched insurance companies and filled out countless forms. Sarah helped by documenting every interaction she had with Brutus, keeping detailed notes about his behavior and temperament. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Gazette, ran a front-page story about the unusual situation. The headline read, "Local Girls Bond with Warthog Divides Community," and it included photos of Sarah and Brutus together. The story attracted attention from outside Millbrook, and soon reporters from larger newspapers were calling to ask for interviews. Sarah was amazed to discover that people from all over the state were interested in her story. Some called her family to offer support and encouragement, while others criticized them for keeping a dangerous wild animal. The attention was overwhelming, but it also brought unexpected help. A wildlife sanctuary in Austin offered to provide expertise and support for Brutus's care. An animal behaviorist from the University of Texas expressed interest in studying their relationship. Most importantly, an animal rights organization offered to help pay for the permits and insurance. But along with the support came new challenges. The media attention attracted the notice of state wildlife officials, who announced they would conduct their own investigation into whether Brutus should be allowed to remain with the Martinez family. Sarah learned that the state had much stricter rules about keeping wild animals than the town of Millbrook. Even with the town council's approval, state officials could still order Brutus's removal if they determined he posed a risk to public safety or if his care didn't meet state standards. The investigation would include interviews with the family, medical examinations of Brutus, and assessments of their property and security measures. Sarah tried not to worry, but she knew that state officials might be harder to convince than her neighbors had been. During this stressful time, Sarah's relationship with Brutus became even more important to her. Every evening after dealing with paperwork and phone calls, she would sit by the fence and talk to him about her day. His calm presence helped her cope with the pressure and uncertainty. Brutus seemed to sense the tension in the household. He became more protective of Sarah, positioning himself between her and any strangers who visited the property. When reporters came to take photos, Brutus would watch them carefully, only relaxing when he saw that Sarah was comfortable with their presence. The new fencing was finally completed just days before the state inspection. The reinforced barriers were higher and stronger than before, with additional safety features recommended by wildlife experts. The family had spent most of their savings on the project, but they knew it was necessary to prove their commitment to safety. Dr. Wilson continued his research and documentation, creating a detailed report about Brutus's behavior and the benefits of his relationship with Sarah. He included video, evidence of the warthog's gentle nature, and expert opinions from other animal behaviorists who supported keeping them together. The week before the state inspection, Sarah hardly slept. She spent hours each day with Brutus, wanting to make sure he would be calm and well-behaved when the officials arrived. She practiced having strangers approach while she was with him, teaching him to remain relaxed even when people he didn't know were nearby. Sarah's parents were also feeling the pressure. They had risked everything to support their daughter's friendship with Brutus, and now they faced the possibility that state officials might still take him away, despite all their efforts. The family received surprising support from unexpected sources. Several of their neighbors, including some who had initially opposed allowing Brutus to stay, offered to speak to the state officials on their behalf. They had observed the animal for months and could testify that he had never shown any aggressive behavior. Even Mrs. Henderson, who had led the original complaints, agreed to tell the investigators that Brutus had not caused any actual problems in the neighborhood. Her change of heart meant a lot to Sarah, who had been hurt by her neighbor's initial opposition. The night before the inspection, Sarah's extended family gathered at their house for dinner. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins came to show their support and to meet Brutus for themselves. Sarah was nervous about introducing him to so many new people at once, but Brutus handled the attention beautifully. Her grandmother, who had always believed in Sarah's gift with animals, spent a long time observing Brutus and Sarah together. Afterward, she pulled Sarah aside. "I've lived a long time and seen many things," her grandmother said, "but I've never seen anything like what you have with that animal. Don't let anyone tell you it's not special, because it is." As the evening ended and family members prepared to leave, Sarah felt more supported than ever before. Win or lose, she knew her family believed in her and in the importance of her friendship with Brutus. That night, Sarah made one final visit to Brutus before the inspection. She sat with him in the moonlight and tried to prepare him for what would happen the next day. "Tomorrow, some very important people are going to come and decide if you can stay with me," she whispered. "I need you to be your best self. Show them how gentle and good you are." Brutus seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. He rested his head against the fence near Sarah's hand and made the soft rumbling sound that meant he was content. Sarah felt a sense of peace despite her nervousness. Whatever happened tomorrow, she knew she had done everything possible to protect their friendship. The state inspection team arrived at exactly 9 o'clock on a crisp October morning. Sarah watched from her bedroom window as 3 official vehicles pulled into their driveway. Her stomach felt like it was full of butterflies, and her hands were shaking as she got dressed in her best clothes. The team consisted of 5 people, 2 wildlife biologists, a veterinarian, a legal compliance officer, and a safety inspector. They wore official uniforms and carried clipboards, cameras, and testing equipment. Sarah had never seen so many serious-looking adults focused entirely on her family's situation. Dr. Martha Stevens, the lead wildlife biologist, was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She had spent her career studying human-animal interactions, and she had specifically requested to lead this investigation after reading Dr. Wilson's preliminary reports. The inspection began with interviews. Sarah's parents went first, answering detailed questions about how Brutus had come to live on their property, what safety measures they had implemented, and how they managed his daily care. The officials took notes on everything, occasionally asking follow-up questions that made Sarah's mother nervous. Then it was Sarah's turn. She sat at the kitchen table across from Dr. Stevens, trying to control her nervousness. The other officials stayed outside to examine the fencing and take measurements of Brutus's living area. "Tell me about your relationship with Brutus," Dr. Stevens said gently. "How did it begin?" Sarah started talking about that first day when Brutus appeared at their fence. As she described their initial meeting and the gradual development of their bond, she began to feel more confident. Dr. Stevens listened carefully, occasionally asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested in understanding the situation. "Have you ever felt afraid of Brutus?" Dr. Stevens asked. "Never. Sarah replied without hesitation. He's never given me any reason to be afraid. Even when he's hungry or excited, he's always gentle with me. What about when other people are around? Does his behavior change? Sarah thought carefully before answering. He becomes more protective when strangers are here, but he's never aggressive. He just watches them more carefully. If I'm comfortable with someone, he relaxes too. Dr. Stevens made notes as Sarah spoke. Her expression was neutral, making it impossible for Sarah to guess what she was thinking. After 30 minutes of questions, she asked Sarah to take her outside to meet Brutus. The moment of truth had arrived. Sarah led Dr. Stevens to the backyard, where Brutus was waiting by the fence. The other officials stopped their measurements to observe the interaction. Brutus noticed the strangers immediately. His ears were alert and his posture was more rigid than usual. But when Sarah approached the fence and called his name softly, his entire demeanor changed. He moved toward her with his familiar gentle gait, making the soft rumbling sound that meant he was happy to see her. "Hello, Brutus," Sarah said, reaching through the fence to touch his side. "These people are here to meet you. They want to make sure you're safe and happy." Dr. Stevens watched in fascination as Brutus responded to Sarah's voice. She had seen many human-animal relationships in her career, but the level of communication between Sarah and the Warthog was remarkable. "May I come closer?" Dr. Stevens asked. Sarah nodded and moved slightly to the side, keeping one hand on Brutus to reassure him. Dr. Stevens approached slowly, speaking in calm, low tones. Brutus watched her carefully but showed no signs of aggression or fear. "He's beautiful," Dr. Stevens said, genuinely impressed. "His condition is excellent. Someone has been taking very good care of him." The veterinarian on the team, Dr. Rodriguez, conducted a thorough health examination of Brutus through the fence. She checked his eyes, examined his skin and coat, and observed his movement and behavior. Brutus submitted to the examination calmly, seeming to understand that it was necessary. "This animal is in perfect health," Dr. Rodriguez announced. "His weight is ideal, his coat is healthy, and he shows no signs of stress or malnutrition. His dental health is excellent, and his overall condition suggests he's been receiving expert care." The safety inspector examined the new fencing system and found it exceeded state requirements. The enclosure was secure enough to contain Brutus while giving him adequate space to move and exercise. Emergency protocols were in place and all safety equipment was properly maintained. After 3 hours of detailed examination, the inspection team gathered in the Martinez family's living room to discuss their findings. Sarah and her parents waited anxiously while the officials reviewed their notes and photos. Dr. Stevens spoke for the group. "We need to be completely honest with you about the challenges this situation presents. Keeping a wild warthog in a residential area goes against most established protocols for wildlife management." Sarah's heart sank, but Dr. Stevens continued. "However, this case presents some unique circumstances that we cannot ignore. The animal has demonstrated remarkable adaptation to domestic life, and his bond with Sarah appears to be genuine and beneficial to both parties." She explained that the team had consulted with wildlife experts from across the country during their lunch break. The consensus was that separating Sarah and Brutus at this point could be traumatic for both of them. "We are prepared to recommend that Brutus be allowed to remain with your family, subject to continued monitoring and compliance with state regulations," Dr. Stevens announced. Sarah felt like she might faint from relief. Her parents both started crying, and even Dr. Wilson, who had arrived to observe the inspection, wiped his eyes. But there were still conditions to be met. The family would have to allow quarterly inspections, maintain detailed health and behavior records, and participate in an ongoing research study about human-animal bonding. Any signs of aggressive behavior or health problems would trigger an immediate review. The most significant requirement was that Sarah would have to complete a specialized training program in exotic animal care. The state would provide the training at no cost, but she would need to demonstrate competency in animal behavior, safety protocols, and emergency procedures. Sarah agreed enthusiastically to all the conditions. The training program sounded like an incredible opportunity to learn more about animals and to prove her commitment to Brutus's welfare. Dr. Stevens had one final requirement that surprised everyone. "We want to document this relationship for scientific purposes. Would you be willing to allow researchers to study your interactions with Brutus? The data could help us better understand human-animal bonds and improve wildlife management practices. Sarah looked at her parents, who nodded their approval. If it helps other animals and people like us, then yes, Sarah replied. As the inspection team prepared to leave, Dr. Stevens pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "You have something very special here," she said. "Not many people could have formed the kind of relationship you have with Brutus. But with that gift comes great responsibility. You're going to be watched by people who don't understand what you've accomplished. You'll need to be perfect in your care of him, because any mistake will be seen as proof that this arrangement doesn't work." Sarah nodded solemnly. She understood the weight of the responsibility she had accepted. She was not just caring for Brutus anymore. She was proving that humans and wild animals could coexist peacefully when approached with respect and understanding. That evening, Sarah sat with Brutus and told him about the day's events. He seemed to sense her excitement and relief, moving closer to the fence and making contented sounds. "We did it, Brutus," she whispered. "You can stay. We're going to be together, and we're going to show everyone that our friendship is something beautiful and important." As the sun set over Millbrook, Sarah felt like her life was finally back on track. She had fought for what she believed in and won. But she also knew that the real work was just beginning. Now she had to prove that her faith in Brutus had been justified. 6 months after the state inspection, Sarah's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. The specialized training program had opened doors to a world of knowledge about animal behavior, veterinary science, and wildlife conservation that fascinated her beyond anything she had ever studied in school. Every Saturday, Sarah traveled to the state university where she attended classes with adult wildlife professionals, veterinary students, and researchers. At first, she felt intimidated being the youngest person in the program by at least 10 years, but her instructors quickly recognized her natural talent and deep understanding of animal behavior. Dr. Patricia Ming, who led the training program, became Sarah's mentor. She had worked with exotic animals for over 20 years and was amazed by Sarah's intuitive grasp of animal psychology. Under Dr. Ming's guidance, Sarah learned to read body language, recognize stress signals, and understand the complex social behaviors of various species. The research study involving Sarah and Brutus had attracted international attention. Wildlife behaviorists from universities around the world wanted to observe their interactions. What started as a local controversy had become a case study that was challenging established beliefs about human-animal relationships. Dr. Stevens returned monthly to conduct detailed observations and interviews. She documented how Sarah and Brutus communicated, how their relationship had evolved, and how Brutus had adapted to his unique living situation. The data was being compiled into research papers that would be published in scientific journals, but the attention was not all positive. Animal rights activists had learned about the situation and were divided in their response. Some supported Sarah and Brutus, arguing that their bond proved animals could thrive in human care when treated with respect. Others insisted that wild animals belonged in their natural habitats and that keeping Brutus was a form of captivity, regardless of how well he was treated. Sarah received letters from both supporters and critics. Some people praised her for showing that humans and animals could form meaningful relationships. Others accused her of exploitation and selfishness. Learning to cope with such intense scrutiny was one of the most difficult aspects of her new life. The pressure affected her relationships at school as well. Some classmates were jealous of the attention Sarah received, while others thought she was weird for caring so much about an animal. Sarah found herself becoming more isolated from her peers, but she also discovered that she cared less about fitting in than she once had. Her academic performance, however, soared. Sarah's experiences with Brutus and her training program had given her a clear sense of purpose. She threw herself into studying biology, animal science, and environmental conservation with an intensity that impressed her teachers. Her grades went from average to exceptional in just one semester. The financial burden on her family had eased, somewhat thanks to donations from animal welfare organizations and individuals who supported their cause. A documentary filmmaker had even paid them for the rights to tell their story, providing enough money to cover Brutus's care expenses for several years. But money couldn't solve all their problems. The constant attention and pressure had taken a toll on the entire Martinez family. Elena struggled with anxiety about the ongoing scrutiny of their lives. Miguel worked longer hours to escape the stress at home. The family that had once been close and relaxed now felt constantly on edge. Sarah noticed the changes in her parents and felt guilty about the impact her friendship with Brutus had on their lives. She offered several times to give him up, but both Miguel and Elena refused to consider it. They could see how much Sarah had grown and matured because of her experiences, and they were proud of the young woman she was becoming. The quarterly inspections had become routine, and Brutus always passed with perfect scores. His health remained excellent, and his behavior continued to be gentle and predictable. Dr. Rodriguez, the state veterinarian, often commented that she had never seen a wild animal adapt so completely to domestic life. Brutus himself seemed to thrive under the attention and structured care. His enclosure had been expanded twice to give him more space, and enrichment activities kept him mentally stimulated. He had learned to respond to over a dozen verbal commands from Sarah and could even perform simple tricks that delighted the researchers who observed him. But Sarah noticed subtle changes in Brutus as well. Sometimes she caught him staring into the distance toward the wild scrubland beyond their property. His sleep patterns had changed, and occasionally he seemed restless in ways that concerned her. She wondered if he missed aspects of his natural life that she couldn't provide. These concerns led Sarah to research wildlife sanctuaries and animal preserves where Brutus might have more space and possibly the company of other animals. The idea of giving him up was heartbreaking. But Sarah was learning that sometimes love meant making difficult choices for someone else's benefit. Dr. Stevens noticed Sarah's concerns during one of her visits and addressed them directly. "You're thinking about what's best for Brutus, not just what you want," she observed. "That's the mark of a true animal behaviorist, the willingness to put the animal's needs first even when it's painful for us." They discussed various options for Brutus's future. He could remain with Sarah's family, move to a wildlife sanctuary, or potentially be relocated to a facility where he could interact with other warthogs while still maintaining contact with Sarah. Each option had advantages and disadvantages that needed to be carefully considered. The research data was providing valuable insights into these decisions. Brutus showed clear signs of attachment to Sarah and stress when separated from her for extended periods. But he also demonstrated natural behaviors and instincts that suggested he might benefit from a more naturalistic environment. As Sarah's 15th birthday approached, she faced a decision that would demonstrate just how much she had matured over the past year. The training program was offering her an early admission opportunity to a summer program for gifted students interested in veterinary science. It would mean spending 6 weeks away from home and away from Brutus. The opportunity was exactly what Sarah had been working toward, a chance to advance her education and pursue her dreams of becoming a wildlife veterinarian. But it would also be the longest separation she and Brutus had ever experienced. Sarah discussed the decision with her parents, her mentors, and even with Brutus himself during their evening conversations by the fence. She knew that accepting the program would be a step toward her future career, but she worried about how Brutus would handle her absence. Dr. Stevens suggested that the separation could actually provide valuable data about the depth of their bond and Brutus's ability to function independently. If he showed signs of depression or behavioral problems during Sarah's absence, it would indicate that their relationship had become unhealthy for him. If he adapted well, it would suggest that he had the resilience to potentially transition to a different living situation in the future. The decision weighed heavily on Sarah's mind as she prepared for what might be a turning point in both her life and Brutus's. She had fought so hard to keep them together, but now she was learning that sometimes the greatest act of love was being willing to let go. The night before she had to give her answer about the summer program, Sarah sat with Brutus under the stars and tried to imagine a future where their paths might diverge. The thought was painful, but it was also strangely liberating. She was discovering that growing up meant making choices based on what was right, not just on what she wanted. Whatever she decided would mark the beginning of a new chapter in their remarkable story together. Sarah made the decision to accept the summer program, and the 6 weeks that followed would change everything. The separation from Brutus was harder than she had anticipated, but it also revealed truths that surprised everyone involved in their case. During the first week of Sarah's absence, Brutus showed signs of distress. He refused food, spent hours pacing along the fence, and made distressed vocalizations that worried the Martinez family. Dr. Stevens visited twice during that week to monitor his condition and document his response to the separation, but something remarkable happened during the second week. Brutus began to adapt. He started eating normally again and his pacing decreased. Most significantly, he began displaying behaviors that he had never shown while living with the family. He created wallows in the dirt, marked territory boundaries, and demonstrated complex foraging behaviors that were purely instinctual. Dr. Stevens was fascinated by these developments. It's as if Brutus is remembering who he is when he's not focused entirely on his relationship with Sarah, she explained to Miguel and Elena. This doesn't diminish their bond, but it shows that he has maintained his wild instincts and could potentially thrive in a more natural environment. Meanwhile, at the summer program, Sarah was discovering her own identity beyond her role as Brutus's caretaker. Surrounded by other students who shared her passion for animals, she felt intellectually challenged and socially accepted in ways she had never experienced before. The program included field work at various wildlife facilities, where Sarah observed animals in semi-natural habitats. She watched wolves interact in pack structures, observed elephants caring for their young, and studied the complex social behaviors of primates. These experiences gave her a new perspective on what constituted a fulfilling life for wild animals. One pivotal moment came during a visit to a warthog preserve in East Texas. Sarah watched a group of warthogs foraging together, wallowing in mud and engaging in social behaviors that Brutus had never been able to experience. She realized that despite all the love and care she had provided, she had inadvertently deprived him of the company of his own kind. Dr. Ming, who was leading the field trip, noticed Sarah's emotional response to observing the warthogs. "This is one of the hardest lessons in animal care," she said gently. "Sometimes we love an animal so much that we don't realize what we're taking away from them, even while we're giving them everything we can." That evening, Sarah called home to speak with her parents. For the first time, she discussed the possibility that Brutus might be happier in a different environment. The conversation was emotional, but her parents supported whatever decision she felt was best for both herself and Brutus. When Sarah returned home at the end of the summer program, she was amazed by what she found. Brutus was still happy to see her, and their bond was as strong as ever. But she could also see the changes Dr. Stevens had described. He seemed more confident, more independent, and somehow more fully himself. The reunion was joyful but also bittersweet. Sarah realized that Brutus had not only survived her absence, but had grown in positive ways. She spent hours sitting with him, observing the new behaviors he had developed and thinking about what they meant for his future. Over the following weeks, Sarah worked with Dr. Stevens and Dr. Ming to explore options for Brutus's long-term care. They visited several wildlife sanctuaries and spoke with experts about the possibility of gradually introducing Brutus to other warthogs while maintaining some level of human contact. The solution they eventually found was revolutionary in the field of wildlife management. A sanctuary in Central Texas agreed to create a special program where Brutus could live with other rescued warthogs while still receiving regular visits from Sarah. The arrangement would allow him to experience natural social behaviors while maintaining the human bond that had been so important to both of them. The transition plan was carefully designed to minimize stress for everyone involved. Sarah would visit the sanctuary weekly at first, then gradually reduce the frequency of her visits as Brutus adapted to his new environment. The sanctuary's staff would be trained in the specific care techniques that Sarah had developed, ensuring continuity in his treatment. The decision to move Brutus was not made lightly. Sarah spent weeks agonizing over whether she was doing the right thing. Her parents, Dr. Stevens and Dr. Ming, all assured her that she was making a mature, selfless choice that demonstrated the depth of her love for Brutus. The day of the move was emotional for the entire Martinez family. Sarah had prepared a detailed care manual for the sanctuary staff and had packed Brutus's favorite toys and blankets. She rode in the transport vehicle with him, talking to him throughout the journey to keep him calm. At the sanctuary, Sarah helped settle Brutus into his new enclosure, which was adjacent to an area where 2 other rescued warthogs lived. The plan was to allow them to see and smell each other for several weeks before attempting any direct contact. Sarah's first visit back to the sanctuary a week later was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Brutus was clearly happy to see her, but she could also see that he was curious about the other warthogs and seemed more alert and engaged with his environment than he had been in recent months. Over the following months, the integration process was remarkably successful. Brutus gradually learned to interact with the other warthogs, forming social bonds that enriched his life in ways that human companionship never could. But he never lost his special connection with Sarah, always coming to the fence when she visited and displaying the same gentle behaviors that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Sarah's regular visits to the sanctuary became part of her ongoing education in animal behavior. She documented Brutus's social development and contributed to research about the reintegration of human-bonded animals into semi-natural environments. Her work was so impressive that she was offered an internship at the sanctuary while still in high school. The story of Sarah and Brutus had evolved from a simple tale of an unusual friendship into something much more complex and meaningful. It had challenged assumptions about human-animal relationships, contributed to scientific understanding of animal behavior, and demonstrated that sometimes the greatest love requires letting go. As Sarah entered her senior year of high school, she was already accepted into a prestigious veterinary program at the state university. Her experiences with Brutus had given her a level of practical knowledge and emotional maturity that impressed admissions committees and scholarship boards. But perhaps the most important lesson Sarah had learned was that love is not about possession or control. It's about understanding what someone needs to be their fullest self, and having the courage to help them achieve it, even when it means personal sacrifice. The last scene of their story finds Sarah, now 18, sitting beside Brutus in the sanctuary as he rests contentedly after a day of foraging and socializing with his warthog companions. She tells him about her plans for veterinary school and her dreams of working with wildlife conservation programs around the world. Brutus listens with the same attentive expression he had always shown during their conversations, occasionally making the soft rumbling sounds that mean he is content. The bond between them remains strong, but it has evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than either of them could have imagined when they first met at a chain-link fence in a small Texas town. Their story had begun with a girl trying to save an animal, but it ended with both of them saving each other in ways that would influence the rest of their lives. Sarah had found her calling and Brutus had found his place in the world. Sometimes that's the most anyone can ask for from love.